Hey guys, welcome to my crash course on knowing the pandemic, COVID-19. Let's go ahead and let's get started. We're going to start with what is COVID-19. So, here we go. First thing I want you to know is that everything here is factual. I did my best over the past week or so to kind of research everything there is to know about the virus and kind of explain it in a way that I thought was helpful. So, I tried to have as few opinions as possible, try to leave politics totally out of it, and try to really just focus on the science. So don't worry if you're worried that your views might differ from mine. There's no real politics in here, no opinions, mostly science. Here we go. All right, so first thing you're probably wondering is, well, where did that name come from? COVID-19, right? Well, let me tell you. It's based on the virus, what it looks like. So the CO stands for corona, which if you actually kind of look at this virus, you'll see that there are these little red peaks to it. Those red peaks are called crowns, and crown, that's where we get the Latin corona, coronavirus. That's where it comes from. So that's where the CO comes from, is corona. V comes from virus, D means disease, and 19 is from the year. So I had an adult the other day ask me, like, hey, are there 18 other types of coronavirus? And no, there's 6. But the 19 comes from the fact that it was in the year 2019. And corona just means there's a crown on the virus structure itself, which helps it stick to stuff, is my understanding. So yeah, here's a link of the other viruses. Cool. Here's something that you need to know about coronavirus and kind of how it works in our bodies. So we looked at the virus, now we're going to look at like symptoms and stuff. It's a brand new virus. It just came out in 2019, so we've never seen anything exactly the same as it. We've seen things that are similar, but that doesn't necessarily help us. It came from bats. Most viruses that we see transmitted come from something else. They don't just come out of nowhere, and then they eventually get to humans. So we don't think that it necessarily came directly from bats. It could have gone from bats to something in the middle, whether that was another animal or something else, and then to us. That's what we think as of right now, how it came to be. It spread through the upper respiratory system. So here's a fun fact. Here's your respiratory system. Guess what part is the upper in the upper respiratory system? It's actually just like the mouth and lower part of your throat. That's upper respiratory system. So this isn't in your lungs. It's just in the upper part of your body. Because it's in the upper part of your body, that means that anytime you're speaking, coughing, sneezing, spitting, breathing, you could be taking those particles from your upper respiratory system and spreading them everywhere. So because it's an upper respiratory disease, it spreads very effectively. Also, we've been noticing that it makes people have really hard time breathing. And it gives a wide range of symptoms for similar groups of people. So you might take two 26-year-old males, and they might have totally different symptoms just because for some reason it affects people differently, even though they'd be in the same group of male 26. They might have totally different outcomes, for example. And it's got a relatively high morbidity rate for flu. So it travels very fast and it kills a lot of people. This makes it really, really dangerous compared to other viruses that we've seen. Here are some other viruses that we've seen and how they're different. The chicken virus was a little bit more deadly, but it was a lower respiratory disease, which meant in order to get from the stuff that were in your lungs to other people, you had to like really have a deep, deep cough to cough it out. So it had a hard time spreading from person to person. The swine flu, on the other hand, this was an issue in 2009, so 10 years ago. It could spread very effectively, but it didn't kill a whole lot of people. And what you'll see is that viruses are very rarely highly contagious and also very deadly. Usually it's just one or the other. Because think about it, a virus's goal isn't to kill people. A virus's goal is to be as popular as possible. They just want to spread, right? They just want to keep reproducing. So if you can travel effectively from person to person, but then you kill them, you're not going to get as many viruses as you would if you were just highly contagious and just like weren't very deadly. So seeing a highly contagious and highly morbid disease is kind of rare. So coronavirus is in a unique situation where it has the worst of both worlds, very contagious and also very deadly, but not too deadly that it just stops because it's still very contagious. The most similar flu we've seen was in 1819, and they call it the Spanish flu, mostly just because Spain was the only country really reporting about it. So that became a misconception that, oh, it originated from Spain. It didn't. We don't really know where it originated from. In 1918, World War II was going on. Or sorry, correct that. World War I was going on. So think about it. You have all these millions and millions of troops who are fighting and in trenches and sharing diseases all the time and spreading diseases. And then these troops are moving all over the place. So we think that World War I is probably how it came to be for some reason. And it killed 50 million people. And about 500 million people were probably infected. Again, these are very rough numbers because reporting was down and people died from all sorts of things back in those days, including gunshot wounds from being at war. Something that's nice about this pandemic is that it happened before vaccines and antibiotics. So now we have vaccines that we can create to stop a flu pandemic. Now we have antibiotics to treat some of the symptoms or to stop some of like the bad secondary effects that a virus could have. One of the most common things that we see now with COVID-19 is we see things called secondary bacterial infections, which is the virus, which is a virus, messes up your immune system. And then when you have a bacterial infection, you can't fight that as well. That leads to people being on a respirator and stuff like that. So here's a timeline for the Spanish flu. The one thing that's interesting to note is that the flu starts in about March of 1918, and before it ends in 1920 through collective immunity, which just means everyone built up a resistance to it, just because the people who had it either died or they got better, so they had an immunity to it. In between where it starts and where it ends, over those 2 years, we see that we have not only a first wave, but a second wave in September, and a third wave in January. And we even believe that President Woodrow Wilson at some point in time got sick. And we think that might have been from the influenza outbreak, is the theory. And then the first lady was leaving the country for a period of time. Kind of a scary part in American history if you think what could have happened, unelected official at the presidency. Anyways, that's a different topic for a different day. But history's crazy, man. Okay, now, the thing that comes up all the time is kill the virus, which you can't kill a virus, they're not living. Any of you that have taken a biology class before, maybe they touched on the 7 criteria for life. You've got to maintain homeostasis. Viruses don't do that. You got to have levels of organization. Viruses do have those. They've got DNA, which forms genes, which forms chromosomes. They have genes, chromosomes, all that stuff, and then you've got all that in a shell. So anyways, you have reproduction. Viruses don't reproduce. They use a host cell to kind of multiply. So they do create more of them, but it's not 2 viruses mating and reproducing. It's a virus taking over a cell and then programming the cell to churn out more viruses. So we say they don't reproduce. Viruses don't grow. They use the energy from the host cell. They don't actually create energy. We don't know if they respond to stimuli because they're so small, and they do adapt to their environment. So if you look at these 7 criteria, viruses check no on 4 of them and maybe on 1 of them, and 2 yeses. So we say viruses are not living. I've heard them compared to like a automaton, or I don't know, some sort of android, something like that. Like they definitely do things, but they're not really living. Let's compare that to a bacteria now. So viruses over here on the right, bacteria on the left. A bacteria is living. A virus is not. A virus is also quite a bit smaller than a bacteria. Bacteria, things like E. coli, strep throat. Viruses, we're thinking things like flus and colds. A bacteria can be killed with antibacterial soap. You can destroy a virus with soap, but that's for a totally different reason that we'll explain in a little bit. You can't kill a virus because it's already dead. You can wash off bacteria with soap that's not antibacterial. Fun fact. You can also do that with viruses. And also, most antibacterial disinfectants have soap in them, so they will destroy a virus due to a process that we will talk about eventually called destroying the lipid bilayer. We'll get into that in a little bit. So, how do we stop viruses? 3 big ways. Way number 1, kill the virus. Sorry, I just said we don't actually kill viruses. Destroy the virus, right? And you do that through something called destroying the lipid bilayer. You could also stop a virus by stopping the virus reproduction system. And that would stop the virus from infecting other cells. You could also stop the spread from one organism, like a person, to another organism, like another person. So we'll talk about those 3 ways. Okay, lipid bilayer. A lipid, here's what it looks like. It's got a little circle for a head and then 2 green tails. A bilayer is 2 of those lipids kind of sandwiched together, so they look like this. Now, what's important is that soap is like a lipid, except instead of having 2 tails, it's just got 1. So it's got that little head, it's got that little tail. And what soap does is it gets in between this lipid bilayer and splits it. So the shell, the lipid bilayer that has DNA inside of it, is now open, and the DNA is free to kind of float out into the open. So if you're a virus and you no longer have your DNA, you can't get inside a cell, you can't replicate, you're effectively destroyed. So it can destroy a virus. There's other ways to kill a virus. Here's a bunch of others. Heat, UV, if you boil water, you got bleach and chlorine. These all kill viruses in different ways. Some, you'll look at the red part, some destroy the DNA, kind of make it impossible for it to reproduce. Some break open the shell on the outside in the blue here, and some kind of denature that protein, causing it to split open. So it either splits it open or kills the DNA inside. The problem with this, though, is that other cells, like human cells, also have a shell and DNA. So some of these ways that kill virus DNA would also indiscriminately kill human DNA. So we got to be careful. That's why we can't solve this problem by drinking bleach, for example. It won't work because if you drink bleach, yes, you'll kill the virus cells, but you'll also kill your own cell. It's like destroying your house to solve a cockroach problem. You get an exterminator. You don't blow up your house, right? Okay, another way is through these things called antivirals. Antivirals will not destroy the virus. They won't get rid of viruses. They'll just stop the virus from spreading from cell to cell to cell. So an antiviral's job is to stop virus replication. Here's what virus replication looks like. Virus comes into a host cell, like a human cell. It latches on to the nucleus where all the human cell DNA is, turns the DNA from human cell DNA to virus-making DNA. And then now the cell, this entire cell is now pumping out a bunch of new viruses. Here's the problem with this. It's easy to stop DNA replication, but it's hard to stop virus DNA replication specifically. So we got to figure out a way to stop virus replication and also not stop human replication. So there are some antivirals. Those are difficult to make. Usually it's easier to just make a vaccine. Okay, now, third way to stop the spread as of right now is to stop it from going from person to person. So I'm going to give you 4 scenarios. Scenario 1, 2 people. Scenario 2, 2 people, but the person without COVID has a mask. Scenario 3, COVID person has a mask, other person does not. Last scenario, both people have a mask. This goes from top to bottom in terms of what is the best way, what is the worst way to stop the spread to what is the best way to stop the spread. So up top here, we have our high risk stuff, and down below here, we have our low risk stuff. These arrows are meant to demonstrate the amount of aerosol particles or just like little droplets that could have COVID-19 in them. from a COVID-19 carrier. And what you'll notice is that the mask acts as a good physical barrier. You've got droplets, they hit the mask, they don't go through, except for some of the really, really small particles, which we call aerosols. So what you'll notice here is that the mask, a general mask, is not effective at getting rid of all particles. Some particles will still get through, but that being said, both people wearing a mask is much, much better than both people not wearing a mask. Think, if all the particles got through, that's a much higher chance that the other person has of then getting COVID-19 versus if only some of the particles get through. The chance is much, much, much lower. We don't have good numbers in terms on what a mask actually does in terms of reducing the amount of droplets that get through. We don't have really good numbers in terms of how effective each strategy is at preventing COVID-19, just because this is also very new. But we do know, based on how we know COVID spreads, we do know which method is better than the others. So we can do a ranking, but if you'll see some memes like this that have percentages next to them. Those percentages aren't exactly accurate just because at this point in time, we don't know what those percentages are. But we do know that both masked up is the best, no masks is the worst. So why do masks work? Masks, as you know, are not 100% effective. They don't stop all the particles, especially those little aerosols, those little small droplets. Social distancing, also not 100% effective. Some research says that aerosols, those particles from your mouth, can travel over 28 feet in distance. So think, something's traveling 28 feet, that's way more than 6, right? But we know that if we combine masks and social distancing, it's the best solution we have right now. So, wear a mask. That's really the moral of the story here, guys. It can filter out most droplets about 3 microns in size. But COVID-19 droplets are anywhere from 1 micron to 5 microns in size. So it'll filter out most COVID droplets, not necessarily all of them. A little bit of perspective here. Human hair is 60 to 120 microns. That's its thickness. So these particles are super, super small. The other thing that I wanted to add, in addition to us not knowing how effective masks or social distancing are in terms of numbers, we don't actually know how many droplets you need before you get infected. And of course, it's definitely going to vary based on person to person, but there's also no research to say that if you get hit with 1 aerosol droplet, you will get COVID-19, right? We know that it's somewhere less than 1 and greater than or somewhere greater than 1 and less than 1 million droplets, right? We know that somewhere in that range, we just don't know where. So masking and social distancing isn't effective at reducing all droplets, but that doesn't mean it isn't effective at reducing the spread of COVID-19. Also, these numbers about masks filtering droplets around 3 microns in size, that's for just a generic cloth or surgical mask, which are not the most effective. There are masks out there called N95, which you might have heard of. Those are super, super effective. They will stop COVID-19 from spreading from person to person, but don't just go out and buy one, because it's not just about you not spreading COVID-19, it's about everyone else. So if you're the only person who has all the N95 masks, someone could very easily give you COVID-19 just because if everyone else is not also wearing a mask, that's the issue. So don't wear a mask necessarily to protect yourself, you wear a mask to protect others. That's the key here. Wear a mask to protect other people, like your grandma, for example, or my grandma. She's a wonderful lady. Anyways, moving on. Here's a little picture of doggos. Oh, they're so cute. Look at them. They're wearing their masks. Remember here that there is an incorrect way to wear your mask. You want to cover your entire kind of upper respiratory system, which is your nose and your mouth. You want to cover both of those things with a mask. So make sure you do that. All right, the next part is going to talk about anecdotal evidence. So hopefully you're going to tune in for that next part. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you loved watching the little doggos. All right, goodbye.